Okay, back to page 18. That's no way to make a decision, and if you are satisfied I'm not, it is best that you go back. Okay, a key turning point in his relationship with his father that's very strong in his memory. I was almost angry then and told him, as all children do, that I wished he would leave me alone, etc. And then later on, the father says, I'm not telling you to do anything, only asking you. The next morning I returned to school. Obviously, having thought about what his father said, having thought about his own life and what he wants, but then also getting the response from his mother. As I left, my mother followed me to the porch and said, I never thought a son of mine would choose useless books over the parents that gave him life. She couldn't be more clear about her opposition to education versus going out to work on the boat, and to placing that responsibility on her son's shoulders, despite what his father has clearly said he wants him to do. The father's mood seems to change then as he gets an extra level of enthusiasm for doing what he's doing, and you can only speculate that his son's decision to continue his education has made a real difference to him, and the way he's looking at the world in a more optimistic manner. In the weeks that followed, he got up rather miraculously, and the gear was ready, and the Jenny Lynn was freshly painted, etc. The narrator talks about then, after school was finished, going and doing the job with his father. He also talks about, on the bottom of page 19, about his uncle. He was expecting another child and would be supporting 15 people by the next spring, and could not chance my father against the family that he loved. So even in the wider family, they're realising that he's not the man he used to be, that physically he might not be up to it, and there's a level of risk there every morning as to whether he's going to be able to continue. And obviously with that many people relying on him, he had to take on a different job. I joined my father for the trawling season, and he made no protest, and my mother was quite happy. So once back to the things that she's familiar with, she's happy to leave her son and to approve of him. Just down on 20, bit down from the top, if I was not up, they would toss pebbles to my window, and I would be very embarrassed and tumble downstairs to where my father lay fully clothed atop his bed, reading his book and listening to his radio and smoking his cigarette. When I appeared, he would swing off the bed and put on his boots and be instantly ready, and then we would take the lunches my mother had prepared the night before and walk off towards the sea. He would make no attempt to wake me himself. Now, you can look at that in a couple of different ways, I think. On the one hand, the father is happy that the boy is continuing with school, and so fishing, going out on the boat is not going to be his whole life. He's waiting to see if the boy can manage it, or it might just be that he sees his son as growing into a man, and it's his responsibility to get himself up. It's a difference between your parents always coming in and waking you up in the morning and parents who say you've got an alarm, you need to be able to get yourself up. It's his job to be able to manage his own affairs. His father's just patiently there waiting for him. You decide what makes the most sense to you. Second half of page 20, we have again the reflection on how his father looked physically. I think the more stories you've read, the more you'll be aware that MacLeod speaks of fair-haired, blue-eyed, red-headed, fair-skinned, redheads in this story, all having ancestors in Scotland where there's a far greater percentage of redheads with blue eyes. And he says, my father did not tan, he never tanned, because of his reddish complexion, and the salt water irritated his skin as it had for 60 years. It's the idea that his father is of people who have moved there and who really don't belong there. His ancestors didn't belong there. They're not suited to the weather, to the climate, to the conditions. He describes in detail. He burned and reburned over and over again, and his lips still cracked so that they bled when he smiled, and his arms, especially the left, still broke out into oozing saltwater boils as they had ever since I was a child, etc. He continues to live a physical life, a life where he is exposed to the elements, and those elements attack him and cause him harm every single day. But he continues on with it. The bottom of page 20, and then I saw that some of many things that I'd seen all my life as if for the first time. So it's that moment of awakening, of realising, of going from being a boy, interested only in yourself, to being a man who can see things and understand. And he says, and I thought that perhaps my father had never been intended for a fisherman, either physically or mentally. At least not in the manner of my uncles. He had never really loved it. Importantly, he goes on to say, and I remembered that one evening in his room, when we were talking about David Copperfield, he had said that he had always wanted to go to the university, and I had dismissed it then as in the way one dismisses one's father, saying you would like to be a tightrope walker. Very important there, because it makes it clear that his library, the things he loves doing, and his pride in his children finding their own way towards the same dreams, that's all very important, and again places them at odds with the life that the mother and the mother's family expect of them. MacLeod brings up a very interesting idea on the second half of 21, where he says, through the narrator, and then there came into my heart a very great love for my father, and I thought it was very much braver to spend a life doing what you really do not want, rather than selfishly following your own dreams and inclinations. Consider that, if you will, that idea that he's presenting, the idea of duty and responsibility versus dreams and goals and inspiration. Think about what the author is really saying there. Moves on to say, and I knew then that I could never leave him alone to suffer the iron-tipped harpoons which my mother would forever hurl into his soul because he was a failure as a husband and a father, etc. Just that quote, I think you would say, iron-tipped harpoons which my mother would forever hurl into his soul. That's a really great summary of their relationship right there, as long as you can go on and explain why it was that she didn't understand him and what it was that she resented about him and his influence on his children. On page 22, we move on to, the room was now so filled with books as to be almost Dickensian, but he would not allow my mother to move or change them, and he continued to read them, sometimes 2 or 3 a night. Sent also pictures of small red-haired grandchildren with baseball bats and dolls, which he placed upon his bureau, and which my mother gazed at wistfully when she thought no one would see her. Red-headed children with baseball bats and dolls who would never know the sea in hatred or in love. So again, just like in The Return, you've got the new generation living elsewhere, living totally new and different lives, and you've got grandparents wistfully missing out on all of that and perhaps not understanding much of it, and the sadness of that the two generations can't be together even despite their differences. The mother is approving of the boy helping his father. You've given added years to his life, she says, and you can imagine how important that is to him, that kind of approval, because he really didn't get very much of it. And finally we move to the very sad ending. But on November 21st, when it seemed we might be making the final run of the season, I turned and he was not there, and I knew even in that instant that he never would be again. And then he talks about how difficult it is in the conditions to turn the boat around and so on. And at the bottom of 23 he says, and you know also the final irony, that your father, like your uncles and all the men that form your past, cannot swim a stroke. So despite the fact that he was a fisherman and it was obviously always very risky, he was unable to swim and could not save himself. Highlight on page 25, and it is not an easy thing to know that your mother looks upon the sea with love and on you with bitterness, because the one has been so constant and the other so untrue. That's a very good summary of the mother's views, although I do think the author is being very, the narrator is being very hard on himself and his understanding of his mother's feelings about him. We finish with a no-holds-barred physical description, just like we've had so many physical descriptions of the father earlier on. We have the description of his body that was taken out of the water. His hands were shredded ribbons, as were his feet, which had lost their boots, and his shoulders came apart in our hands. And the fish had eaten his testicles, and the gulls had pecked out his eyes, and the white-green stubble of his whiskers had continued to grow in death. He's returned to the ocean, to nature. He has been reclaimed. He lived a long life. He lived a life working with the sea and supporting his family through the bounty of the sea. But in the end, it claimed him and it took him back. That's where he returned. And that's where the story ends, and think back to where it was at the beginning. The perhaps middle-aged man still having nightmares about letting his father down because he'd slept through the early wake-up time, or he'd done the wrong thing, and his mother would be very disappointed in him because the life that she wanted him to lead was one that he was not particularly committed or interested in, and he carried that guilt and regret with him for his life. Okay, that'll do for the boat for the moment. Please make sure as you go through that you're trying to draw links with other stories as much as possible, and write down what you believe the key themes are there. Just to review, I think the key themes, as I've mentioned, are the traditional way of life, the life of the parents for generations, about how times change and there's a turning point that comes when the next generation's moved on. So there's the consideration of the value of education, of having dreams and ambitions, but also the transformative power of literature and reading, the out that these kids found in, first of all, reading magazines, then reading books, then working and getting to know people from outside, from other parts of the country, and then finally deciding that their lives were going to be different and they were going to leave the place that their parents raised them in. And I want you to think about whether that inevitably leads to a sense of regret or of guilt at the very least, or perhaps a sense of having one foot in either world, where you were raised one way, but your future belonged elsewhere, and what that does to a person emotionally and psychologically. Okay, I hope you've got something out of this recording. Please email me if you've got any questions, if you want to argue about anything or you want me to clarify anything, and I'll try and do a podcast on each of several of these stories and put it up so that you can slowly work your way through it at home if you want to, but please let me know if there's anything you'd like me to focus on. Okay, thanks. See you next time. Bye.